Our next presenter is Councilmember Kymberly Pine. Councilmember Pine is the Vice Chair of the Honolulu City Council and the Chair of the Council's Committee of Zoning and Housing. She has served on the Honolulu City Council for almost 6 years. Prior to her election to the council, Pine served 4 years in the Hawaii State House of Representatives, representing the communities of Ewa Beach. And from 2010 to 2012, she served as the House Minority Floor Leader. This morning, she'll be presenting on urban walk-ups. Please welcome Councilwoman Kymberly Pine.
Well, hello, everyone. It seems like we've been talking about this for many years. So hopefully this year we get it right. Well, I want to thank everyone for having me. We're actually doing a lot of things at the City Council, but Senator Chang asked me to talk about the Walkup Apartment legislation, and I do want to commend Marshall Hung, who really came up with this concept. As you know, he was the master developer for 801 South Street and built these wonderful units at a very affordable price. So I'm going to briefly talk about the affordable housing overview, current and future demand challenges, best practices, and implementing best practices, some of the things that the City Council has done. So again, what was stated earlier in the DBED report is our housing needs is by 2025 to have at least 64,000 units statewide. 70% of that, or 44,000 units, are at 80% AMI and below. And so what does this mean in general of what our target is going to be? It's really rental housing. Because once you start making a little more than that, you want to buy things. And usually around over 100 AMI, that's where people want to purchase something. For the politicians out there, and I know all you developers want to educate us, so we're going to kind of look at this here. So we talk about building affordable housing, but it's not so easy. So let's look at what this really means in terms of the cost to the developer. So of course you have our single family ADU. That's something that we passed a few years ago to allow single family home residences to add their own ADU and rent it out to the public. And we have other ones all the way down to the bottom where the luxury condos, but I know some of you folks building in Ala Moana say it's not 300 and up anymore, it's about 400 a square foot and up. So we're going to be focusing on this red area, or a new apartment building that we're going to allow to be built with different type of zoning laws that goes up to 60 feet, is only going to cost $225 a square foot. So we know what we need to build. So let's talk about the low-rise apartments and why it can be rented and built cheaply. But what's stopping them from doing it right now in the current zoning? Well, the challenges are that many or most will revolve around a few major issues with the city land use ordinance. The land use ordinance is overly regulatory in apartment zones. It's a decade-old section of the law which needs to be updated to allow for more density in areas zoned for multifamily living. This is why you started to, well, so ironic, all these monster homes starting to pop up in residential areas because it was easier to build an illegal apartment-like structure on a residential lot than an apartment zone. And so we realized that we need to give more FAR in this area. Financing, of course, is complicated, and with changing interest rates, it's going to affect a lot of projects. But lastly, we're in a crisis, which is why we need to look beyond merely requiring some affordable housing, as the city has done in new projects. And instead, we need to incentivize development of wholly affordable rental apartment buildings. So the city has incorporated many of the best practices used nationally that you'll see here to address the housing crisis and incentivize the development of more affordable housing. This diagram from the National Housing Conference shows 6 critical strategies to create affordable housing. The city currently employs all of them. What I want to focus on today for the remainder of this presentation are these 2 strategies. which is expanding development opportunities and then reducing the cost of creating affordable housing. So in this next slide, you'll see we had DPP, our Department of Planning and Permitting, do an analysis of the apartment zone and what could happen if we helped development in this area. And so you'll see, I want to draw your attention to this little box here. In the bill that we passed and sent to the Planning Commission, where we give more density, higher density in terms of height, and less setbacks, and less parking requirements, and other giveaways, DPP said that if we built in these apartment zones, which range from 5,000 square foot to almost 20,000 square foot, that we would possibly allow the private sector to build over 21,000 units. And I want to talk about that. The government philosophy has typically been, as our previous speaker had stated, is to require inclusionary zoning. And we certainly did that in Bill 58 and 59, but we'll talk about that a little later. But it hasn't really worked because we're in this crisis still. And so in working with a lot of the developers on the affordable housing legislation, they said, if you can just help us to build in a more affordable manner and give us some different change in zoning, we could build without any government money at all. And so by changing the zoning in the apartment zones, all of this privately funded investment, should it be built out as we hope and expect, because the developer will still be able to make a profit and provide affordable housing, almost half of the supply that's needed by 2025 can be accomplished in this area. So how do we incorporate best practices and overcome the challenges to develop? So the council adopted Resolution 1878, an LUO amendment that if building 100% affordable rental low-rise and below, we increase your permitted density in apartment zones, we reduce parking requirements, we create other exemptions in zonings, reduce fees, waive fees, and we create templates for building faster. And then so we were trying to get, I'm so sorry, we were trying to get an actual rendering of what this apartment building would look like, but we weren't able to load it up in time. So these are kind of like the non-pretty renderings that shows the different floor levels, where the parking would be for our potential 20,000 square foot lot, which right now you can't really go that high. And so anyone that owns apartment zone, you'll notice that all these old apartment areas, these buildings are just kind of run down. It's because different rules and regulations that either the state or the city have been placed on apartment zones have made it cost prohibitive to even remodel in this area. So pretty much, we feel that hopefully by January, February, we'll get your support. The LUO amendment will be heard by the Planning Commission. And by February, March, we hope the council will finalize this policy. I want to briefly talk about the affordable housing bills that we did pass. It did cause quite a controversy in the city. As you know, Mayor Kirk Caldwell introduced Bill 58 that had very stiff requirements on affordable housing to be built by developers who are building 10 units or more. And we also passed Bill 59 that really gives in certain areas max density, really high density in certain areas, so that the developer can help to build affordable housing. We worked a year on this with both the developers and affordable housing advocates to find a way where everybody wins. And so I'm very proud of the final bill that we did pass at the City Council. In the end, nobody was opposed to it. We are still kind of looking over it and tweaking it, as certain developers of high rises are actually implementing the law, and we're finding some complications. So we're probably going to introduce another bill to tweak some of that. But especially in TOD areas where we're giving very max densities, we are hoping to get a lot of the 80% and below affordables in there and we recently passed one that's for up to 30 years. So we're very proud to say that all these different things, including the 201H projects that Sam Ku's doing in the Ala Moana corridor. We're finally going to have a mixed-use corridor, especially in the Ala Moana area, where typically it's way too expensive to put any affordable housing in there. And finally, we're going to hopefully start having a city that is walkable and you can ride transit, but also more affordable. So thank you folks very much for allowing me to do this presentation.
Anyway, hey, everybody's been saying for the longest time, the infrastructure needs to be upgraded. And now the Board of Water Supply is going to be upgrading it. What are their plans, if you happen to know, for upgrading along the corridor? You know, I would prefer Mauka, more Mauka than, especially say the Baratania corridor, upgrading it so that we can have more density, since that has been a problem. I mean, existing problem and for future development. Do you happen to know anything about that?
Well, the Board of Water Supply is a separate entity of the city. However, we do work closely with them. They are increasing fees on all of you because they do recognize that they can't keep repairing these water main breaks, and so they are focused on areas where the pipes have deteriorated the most and are the oldest. In terms of, it's really the sewer part that's the most problematic. We are trying our best to work with developers before they start their plans in different areas so that we can make sure that we add the infrastructure first. We need to do a lot of work in Kalihi. If we want to do anything in the university, we have to do a lot there. It's just problematic and a lot more costly. So we're looking at places more like Kalihi or a few miles west this way as well in Iwilei to really increase the density there in terms of our sewer capacity. Yes.
Good morning. Thank you for your comments. It's a question that I've had about the lower height, walk-up style housing. So I live on Baratania Street, and I'm curious, there's a lot of housing in that area, but the parking is also an issue. So would you explain, please, what the Land Use Ordinance is about reducing parking requirements? What does that mean? Does that mean the builder doesn't have to provide as much parking? Does that mean more on-street parking? What exactly does that mean? Thank you.
Well, for this particular case, there's two ways to look at it. And in the bill, we kind of gave some flexibility to the Department of Planning and Permitting. Certainly in areas where parking is extremely limited, they will have an ability to make a decision on that particular item. However, some of the renderings that I wasn't able to bring today, it's really up to the private developer and what they want to do. They won't be able to rent their units out if they have no parking. And so in some of the renderings that we showed, the first 2 floors are going to have parking, or if it's a smaller walk-up, then the first floor will be parking. And it's just going to be really up to the developer and the department to see what the needs of the area is.
I ask just one more question about that. So I live in a building where there was adequate parking for the original tenants. Over time, over 40, 45 years the building has been there, the tenants, the owners have changed, and there are tenants who are now in units. The 2 parking spaces that used to come with a condo are now down to 1 because people have sold them or they rent them. There's a parking structure near me that rents to the public. And in that area, so I live at Baratania and Punahou Street. So there's a lot of housing in there. Kapiolani Hospital is there. There's a lot of parking that is rented out, but there's not adequate parking anymore in my building. And so I'm just thinking about this whole idea of building apartment units. Should we also be talking about building parking structures that are separate from individual units that allow for parking in what is becoming more high-density neighborhoods? Just a question.
I think that's a good thought. I think what we're trying to do with transit-oriented development, we're spending $10 billion on a rail system. We're really trying to, or hopefully, encourage people to take more transit. And we're hoping to improve the bus system where you don't have to wait an hour for a bus like in Manoa. It takes forever. And there's a lot of people that want to take transit, but it doesn't come as often. So the goal is to have more buses coming at more times an hour. And so there is an overall plan for that. And someone did mention at least parking when people were opposing the bike lanes the mayor put in. We were talking about putting parking structures in certain areas to help with the parking issue.
Hello, I live in Kapahulu, or it used to be Kymberly when I was born in 1947. But I recently had to exterminate bed bugs in my house. I rent out some rooms, and two of the tenants that take the bus to work, one of them now takes their car again, had bed bugs in their room. And the best thing that we can figure out is they probably caught it from the buses, because the other people, their rooms weren't infected. But of course, when you do a house, you have to exterminate the whole house when you have bed bugs. And I'm concerned about, as we promote public transit, which is a good thing, if we're not watching out for bed bugs in the public transit, that it'll come back and I'll have to be doing this a couple times a year instead of once in a lifetime, if that's true. And it seems like that's where the exterminators felt it might have been coming from. Can you tell us something about what people are doing about bed bugs in our public transport and buses?
Well, I have to say that no one's reported a bed bug on the bus, and certainly we'll look into that. We take those things very seriously, but know that these same people, they go to McDonald's, they go to other restaurants. It's not just public transit where people are sharing seats in areas. And so if that is truly the case, we're going to have evidence that is occurring. So if you can let us know what buses they catch, and we can look into that, okay?
Aloha, Councilmember. My name is Jeff Gilbreth. I'm with Hawaiian Community Assets. We're a community development corporation, so we're working a lot with low and moderate income families who are trying to find housing that's affordable for them. Just, I guess, maybe more of a comment, but interested in your thoughts. As we're engaging these communities, folks are really becoming energized around the affordable housing discussion. They want to plug in, they want to figure out how they can support it, how they can have it for their communities. So I wanted to know, is the council or is your office, are you looking at community benefits agreements as part of any of the legislation coming up in the coming year? And if not, is there an opportunity to have a discussion with you and other council members about community benefits agreements to allow these communities and these community members to get plugged in, have conversations with developers, with the public sector, so that all of us are having a conversation?
Actually, we talk about this almost every month in the Zoning and Housing Committee, and I think it's really important for the housing advocates to become friends with developers. And we can't be enemies anymore. You can't be saying, build affordable housing. It's your fault. You go do it. And they say, what, do I have to take a loan because I'm going to lose $5 million? They're not going to build. So I think affordable housing advocates really have to become very knowledgeable of what the struggles are to build. And I think becoming a partner more together with government officials as well as developers would be very helpful. It's been very hard, as a politician myself. I mean, I kind of don't care what anyone thinks about me, so I kind of just power through things, and I don't know how I get elected every time, but a lot of elected officials worry about what their constituents think about them. And so if people like you are saying, stick it to that developer, make them build these units, they're going to look at, there's 20 of you and one of them, and they're going to side with you. And then what has happened in the last 40 years that Dean talked about the problem and how we got here. is that nothing has been built, and now we're in a crisis where our own friends are homeless. So let's kumbaya, all of us together, and let's make this happen, okay?
Yeah, and I think community benefits agreements could be that vehicle for allowing all voices to be heard. One last question.
We already did that. Christine Camp is here. She can let you know that she gave way more
Hey,
community
Christine.
benefits and 84 affordable housing units in Ala Moana that would never been built.
That's
Okay.
excellent. I think we should do more community benefits agreements. And one last question. Any work that the council is looking at to increase the capacity of nonprofit developers so that we can be building at the 30 to 100%?
Yeah, William here from HCDA said that they're looking to start a fund. Raise your hand, William. So a lot of great ideas come in, and a lot of for-profit developers just formed a fund for that gap financing.